John walked slowly and thoughtfully up and down the living room, just a few feet from where his wife Ruth was sitting in a chair with a book in her hands. Ruth felt the confusion in his soul. This was evidenced both by his nervous pacing back and forth and by the heavy sighs that accompanied her husband's steps. She was afraid of the upcoming conversation and the impact it might have on their lives. So Ruth continued to sit in her place, waiting and fearful, sneaking glances at her husband, and only pretending to be enthusiastically reading a book. Finally, John, having made up his mind, turned to her, feeling the hammers of fear and danger knocking in his own head, and said questioningly, "Ruth?" She looked up at him and held her breath, raising her eyebrows in a silent question. "Ruth, I need to talk to you, and I hope you can listen to me before you react to what I have to say," he said slowly, as if through force. Oh my God! A panicked thought burned her consciousness. She had been expecting this conversation for more than a month, but only now she realized that she was actually not at all ready to hear it, not ready for her life to change forever. Ruth exhaled heavily, hiding her inner trembling, and simply said, "Okay, John." She closed her book, placed it on her lap, and tightly clutched the volume with both hands. John slowly sat down on the sofa next to his wife, turned as close to her as possible, carefully covered her graceful hand with his large palm, and said, "I haven't been a very good husband to you lately. I've done things I'm not proud of and dishonorable you with your behavior, but I want to change that right now, if only you'll let me." After these words, hope arose in Ruth's mind, mixed with a fair amount of anger and sadness. These were the emotions she had not allowed herself to feel over the last long and difficult month. "Are we talking now about your affair with Gina Laszlo, or about something else?" she asked, with more sarcasm in her tone than she wanted to show. John turned slightly pale, lowered his eyes, and whispered in a trembling voice, "Crap! When? How? How long have you known about this?" "More than a month," she answered evenly. "For the last 21 years, you've been putting on your police uniform and walking out that door. And every time I've wondered if this would be the day you didn't come home because some fucked-up asshole would shoot and kill you. And in the last month, seeing your back walking away, I wondered every day if this would be the moment when you walked out the door and never came back because you decided to move on with Gina. And I don't know which was worse. In fact, I was thinking about strangling you with my own hands, so the second scenario was probably even worse in my mind than the first. Oh, Ruth, would you believe it if I told you how sorry I am? I stopped all this yesterday. We were going to meet this afternoon, but I called her and told her it was over between us and I wouldn't see her again, and I swear I was serious. I promise you that I will never, never, never again, I won't do anything like that. Please, can you forgive me? I know that I have a lot of work to do to fully regain your trust, and I am ready to do whatever you want. Damn, I don't even want to say this, even if it means giving up on you and not contesting your divorce terms. It's up to you. Tell me what you think. Do you want me dead? Just tell me, and I'll eat my revolver." Ruth thought for a moment, looking at her lost husband, and then said rather coldly, "What do I want? I want you to die. But please do it somewhere where I won't have to clean up after you. You know, blood is so hard to get out of a good carpet." John's eyes widened. "Are you kidding me?" Ruth looked at him with a raised eyebrow and said, "Here you see, you should not make ridiculous proposals to an offended woman. Otherwise, someone may find themselves in a situation where they have to keep promises that they may not want to keep. No, dumbass, I don't want you to kill yourself, but I'm leaving open the I could kill you myself option with these very hands." Ruth showed her husband her well-groomed hands with a blood-red manicure and meaningfully moved her fingers in front of his nose. Then she turned her right hand over and thoughtfully began to study the back of her hand. "However, I really see diamonds in my near future," she said with a very transparent hint, looking at her offending husband. A wry grin appeared on John's face with a clear hint of relief. Damn, she's amazing. Even in the worst situations, she can find something to relieve tension and make a joke about it. I just love this woman. As these thoughts flashed through his head, John gradually relaxed, but the feeling of guilt for the complete betrayal rolled over him with ever-increasing force. How could he do this to her, the love of his life, his closest and dearest partner? Ruth suddenly became very serious, and her voice sounded low and harsh. "John, these past few weeks I've been crying and depressed because of you, hating you, hurting because of you, grieving for us and myself. But still, I love you. You're an asshole, John. How could you what to do with me? With us, with me?" She was crying. No, now she was sobbing, and her small fists beat him on the chest. John pulled her to him, hugged her tightly, and held her as she continued to sob. His own eyes filled with tears, his body shaking from the strength of his own emotions. He gently rocked her and repeated over and over again, "I'm so sorry, so sorry, I'm sorry." She continued to sob, shuddering and trembling, and periodically hit him with clenched fists, saying, "You broke your vows, broke your promise." Minutes passed by as they sobbed together, holding each other tightly for mutual support, for perhaps the first time in months. But at this moment, they were together. Together they will find a way to get through this and move on hand in hand. They continued to sway, cling to each other, and shed tears for what seemed like hours, occasionally receiving weakening blows and blows to their ribs and chests from small, angry fists. The road back to them as before, it turned out to be long and rocky. Outbursts of anger, accusations, and name-calling were commonplace for Ruth along this thorny path. Ruth's contrite, remorseful apologies and attentive attention to every whim became the basis of John's daily existence. After their significant conversation, they had never had sex in the same bed. Ruth's reasoning was that she had slept with him when she found out about his adventures before his confession, and saw no reason why she couldn't share his bed now. But there will be no real sex with her until she finally forgives him. "Besides," she said to him one evening, "it will be easier for me to keep an eye on you if I can see you." She often wore her sexiest nightgowns, and even went so far as to buy very seductive sheer outfits to wear to bed, but made it clear that sleeping next to each other was all they would do in bed until she decided otherwise. Having taken a morning or evening shower, Ruth stood in the bedroom with the sun or the light on, and, captivatingly bending and bending, dried herself with deliberately slow and smooth movements. At any suitable opportunity, she did not hesitate to show off her luxurious naked figure, which she had never done before. When she went to bed, she used perfume and cosmetics with the sole purpose of driving John crazy with lust and desire. At various times of the day, she would suddenly turn on sensual music and perform a slow, undulating striptease in front of John's wide-eyed and open-mouthed eyes, and then calmly return to the routine chores she had previously performed around the house. Damn it. He didn't expect that his wife, whom he had known for so many years, could be so cruel. John had to move around the house rather awkwardly, coping with a constant erection during this terribly frustrating and seemingly never-ending dry spell. Among other things, Ruth began calling John at strange, completely unpredictable times during his workday to find out where he was. She even called his other fellow cops working the same shift and asked them to have John answer the phone on their desk, just to make sure John was actually where he said he would be. To say that John was on the very short leash would be a gross understatement. But he approached the process with humility, realizing that it was the price he had to pay to return to Ruth's heart. He even bore the constant teasing from his fellow shiftmates with stoic calm, reproaching them for it and warning them that they themselves could find themselves in his place, or even in a worse situation, if they ever went astray. So John learned his lesson. One night, about 2.5 months after his confession, John slowly woke up from his sleep and discovered, or rather, sex in progress with his participation. After catching her breath a little and recovering from the frenzied sexual high, Ruth finally squeezed John's face tightly in her hands, looked straight into her husband's eyes, Her flaming green eyes were visible even in the very low light of the darkened bedroom, and said in a voice breaking with excitement, "Remember one thing. You are mine, only mine, completely mine, and never. Do you hear? Never don't forget about it anymore. If you cheat on me even once more, I swear, you will not live." For added emphasis, Ruth hit him on both shoulders with her fists to hammer home the understanding that she was very serious. John ran his rough hand over her face, wet with sweat, kissed her lips very tenderly, and whispered, "Yes, yes, my love, I'm yours, forever, I promise. Thank you, thank you. Damn, what a fool I was. Never, never again. I swear, I swear, I swear." They settled into a soft and wet, intertwined embrace, calmly thinking about where they were, what they almost lost, and where their road would lead next. John kissed the top of Ruth's head and gently stroked her lithe back. It was a real paradise in which his past sins were forgiven. Within himself, he thanked all that was sacred to him for this blessed moment and for the new future for both of them that it foreshadowed. After a long, painful silence, Ruth said softly, but with a hint of oppressive foreboding, "John, I need you to answer 2 questions for me. The first is why Gina, and second, what made you break up with her and admit it to me?" John shuddered slightly, trying with all his might not to ruin this precious moment, and certainly not wanting to return to that page of his memories that had caused all the suffering and struggle that the two of them had just gone through with such difficulty and emotional devastation. He thought silently for a long minute, looking at the ceiling, and then turned his head on the pillow towards her and said quietly, "Baby, I'll tell you everything you want to know. I promise this. Well, I guess the question is, why Gina? Pretty simple. She's been hitting on me for several months, popped into the station to bring me lunch and just talk. Gina always talked about how alone she felt after killing Bill, and that if I could help her, she would be very grateful for it." John was silent for a few seconds, smiled sadly, and continued, "I think she just decided that Bill, her love, left her alone. She should just continue to live and find whoever, and I was that whoever. It was too easy, and she fueled my old cop ego with my feminine wiles. I really felt sorry for her, I really did." The wife snorted disdainfully. "So, if you had contacted Celia Johansson, I would have just walked into your office, poked you in the side 3 times with a fork, and given up. There is no way I could compete with this young beauty. Hell, if she'd just take one look at me, I'd give myself to her. And you know I'm miles away from being attracted to a woman." Ruth grinned indulgently, thoughtfully running her fingers over the curves of her breasts. "In truth, I have to admit that Gina has the most beautiful breasts that money can buy. Maybe you want me to have a breast enlargement too." John stopped her decisively, but there was a playful note in his tone. Ruth gave a playful salute, giggled quietly, and simply said, "Yes, sir, yes, sir." John paused for a long time and then sighed. "As for your second question, I will answer it. But for this, I need you to read something. Then I think you will understand why I decided to confess everything. Can we put this question off until the morning? I'll take the day off and tell you the whole story. Sounds fair enough?" "Not a damn thing. Are you going to take a day off for this? Well, then it must be really important. Otherwise, you may be out of luck for a very long time again." There was a slight chuckle in her voice, which let him know that the old Ruth had returned, and they had a real chance that everything would work out. He whispered a silent prayer of thanks again in his mind, kissed the top of his wife's head, and they fell asleep, still clutching each other in their arms, as if afraid that one of them might suddenly disappear. When the sun rose, John and Ruth still lay entwined in a tender embrace. John woke up first and looked at this naked angel, peacefully snoring near. Ruth's body was facing him, spread out, almost covering the left side of his body. Her head rested on his chest, just below his left nipple. Ruth's brown hair spread across his chest, and her left arm cupped his lower rib cage. It was so wonderful to see her nearby and feel so whole and happy in the arms of the woman I loved. John lightly touched the top of Ruth's head with his lips, so that she didn't even move. As he lazily reviewed the events of the night, the thought suddenly occurred to him that he had gone to bed in his underpants. A question immediately flashed into his mind. How the hell did she manage to take them off without waking him up? And what happened to them? John raised his head, and after a quick inspection, the answer immediately became clear. On either side of his prone figure, he saw the edges of his shorts, or rather what was left of them, spread out to the sides of his body, like short wings. The little minx simply cut the panties off his body and threw away the top part. He snorted quietly for several seconds, barely able to contain himself so as not to burst out laughing, until the disturbing thought came into his head that Ruth could just as easily turn him into the first soprano soloist in the Vienna choir with a couple of simple movements. Boys. He froze, digesting this likely scenario, and swallowed nervously, thanking the Almighty that it did not come true. John then decided that if his wife used him for pleasure while he slept, then there was nothing stopping him from doing the same to her. To do this, he carefully turned her onto her back and began to perform maneuvers to sweetly seduce her warm and velvety sleeping body. Ruth opened one eye, giggled softly, and whispered in a husky, sexy voice, "Don't forget to cover me when you're done." Then she closed her eyes and began to snore loudly, trying to keep the smile off her lips. John couldn't help but laugh heartily at her funny but unsuccessful attempts to pretend to be asleep. For the first time in months, they made love deeply and passionately, pausing only for John to call the station and say he was taking the day off. The duty sergeant, hearing John's breathless voice, just grinned. "Damn it, John! If she finishes you off, make sure she calls me first." "Okay, buddy. I'm glad you came to your senses. Enjoy your day off. You lucky asshole." Having finally left the bed, in which more events had happened in one night than in recent years, the couple moved to the breakfast table, calmly sipping steaming coffee and thinking about their future. All their thoughts were about the times ahead that they would face together, and perhaps the promise, or at least the hope, that better days lay ahead. John decided to start the conversation with a humorous question to lighten the tension a little. "So what the hell even happened last night?" he asked, with a Cheshire cat grin and a slight chuckle in his voice. "You were fucking gorgeous, girl, and I didn't know you were capable of that, especially the part where you cut off my damn boxers." "I admit, my head is a complete mess." Ruth looked at him with a sly, comical grin over her coffee cup, mischievous delight dancing in her emerald eyes. "Well, if you really want no, after teasing you mercilessly with my late-night sex shows and all my seductive strip teases, I was on the edge myself. Last night I dozed off with my back to you, and you sort of snuggled up to me in my sleep. Understand? When I felt this big, hot piece of male flesh pressing insistently between my buttocks, I simply could not stand it any longer. You were passed out, so I turned you over on your back, took the scissors, cut your panties, and climbed on board." Ruth rolled her eyes dreamily, stroking John's muscles. John just shook his head and smiled widely at her confession. Gradually, the smile faded from John's face, and he looked thoughtfully at his wife. He then got out of bed, quietly left the room, and returned a few minutes later, holding several folded pieces of paper in his hand. "Ruth," he began hesitantly, "last night you asked what made me stop dating Gina, and I want to answer that question now. I want to say it again. You can ask me any questions about this, and I will answer as thoroughly and truthfully as I can. Please, first of all, you need to know that I never stopped loving you, caring for you, and wanting you. I know that sounds like complete bullshit after what I did to you, to us, but I swear it's true. It was all about ego and horniness and all that macho shit. I hate myself for what I did, and I wish I could fix it. Just so you know, Gina has never, not once, come close to being this hot, beautiful, sexy, loving, wild as hell as you are, even on your worst day. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will not jeopardize you." He corrected himself. Us again. As for what happened and what gave me a kick in the ass and opened my eyes to what I was doing then, this is what happened. This is what led to the realization and admission of my guilt. John took a deep breath and then continued. A couple of weeks before our conversation, I was working on a report about a corpse found in an alley in one of the most seedy areas of the city. I went to the coroner's office, spoke with him, and later examined the victim's body. The body belonged to a woman about 35 years old. The skin on her hands was rough and cracked, as if she was not used to real hard work, but had been doing this kind of work for some time. This poor woman was robbed and strangled to death. She had no ID or other documents on her, nothing that could be clinging to understand who she was. This case didn't represent anything particularly unusual, but, there was something about this woman that haunted me. I kind of felt like must work on this matter more carefully. So, I asked a couple of our guys from the precinct to scour the area, talk to the locals, and they were able to determine that she worked as a cook at one of the greasy spoon eateries in the area. In that cafe, they paid her in cash, and they didn't even know exactly what her name was. They called her Sad Sadie, or even just sad to her face. The guy we talked to said that she was always sad about something, but she kept herself very withdrawn. She lived in a shitty apartment next door to an abandoned building where drug addicts and runaway children constantly gathered. By the way, during the investigation, we found her personal belongings in various places in this abandoned building, except for those few things that were not even worth stealing in the wrecked apartment of this unfortunate woman. I was examining her old coat, which was once quite an expensive thing, but by that time it was very worn out. In a half-torn inner pocket, I found this letter. At that moment, John lifted the sheets of paper and showed Ruth the papers, which she apparently hid and was going to mail, but apparently did not have time, or did not dare to do so. I read the letter, in the hope that it would tell me more about who this woman was. It was 2 days before I came to you to confess. From the letter, we managed to find out who she was, and as a result of our interviews, we were able to get on the trail of her killer. This happened just last week. When we were chasing this criminal, he was smart enough to run away from our guys across the street and get run over by a truck. Long story short, he died at the scene, saving us a ton of paperwork and saving the city money on legal proceedings. Anyway, this letter continued to haunt me, so I made a copy and read it again. I will read this letter for you, or if you want, you can read it yourself, whichever you prefer. Ruth looked closely at John and asked him to read the woman's letter to her so that she could understand how it affected her husband. John straightened the crumpled sheets of paper on his knee, took the first one in his hands, and began to read, "My dear Ben, I know you probably don't want me to ever address you like that, but that's what you are to me. I can't express how much I'm sorry and how I punish myself for what I did to you and to the children, and I will never be able to get over my own betrayal of you. I'm sorry, Ben. I turned into the kind of person I had always looked at with complete disgust. How could this even happen? What happened to that faithful, devoted wife and mother you used to know? For 6 months I lived a lie. I looked into your eyes, smiled, and joked with you, although deep down I knew that at the same time I was cheating on you with another man. I hate myself for this duplicity. My dear sweet husband, it is very important to me that you know that on your part you have done nothing wrong. No inattention, no forgetfulness on your part can justify the enormous pain that I caused you. Everything that happened is my fault, and only mine. A man who was not my husband complimented me and flirted with me until I fell for his stupid tricks. What a fool I was to trade your daily attention and support for a few well-chosen, flattering words about my appearance and intelligence. Somehow, when you said those same words, they didn't mean as much to me and were taken for granted. Now I am afraid that I will never hear your voice or the wonderful sounds of our children's laughter again. I couldn't look into your eyes, seeing only resentment and disgust in them, so I just decided to disappear and give you the opportunity to move on with your life and perhaps find a new love. Someone who will love you the way you should be loved. You definitely deserve it, and I want it for you with all my heart. I know that you can get a divorce, citing marital abandonment on the part of your wife as the reason. If you decide to go this route, we won't have to share anything, and you can continue to raise our children the way you always have. You are a good father, and I am sure you will always do what is best for them. It is very difficult for me to write further, but I will try to be honest. First of all, to myself. I still remember with horror the day you found out about Phil and me. When Phil's wife came to me that day and told me she had something for me, I just didn't know how to react. When she opened her huge purse, as if taking something out of it, and then hit me with it, I was taken by surprise. I fell from the blow, and when she stood over me, screaming and calling me names, at that moment the realization of what I had really done finally came to me. But then, everything went really badly. The worst thing was when you rushed to my aid. At that moment, without thinking, you rushed to help and protect me from Janine, with that worried expression on your face that you sometimes have. And then she showed you those dirty pictures of Phil and I together. Just a minute later, I watched in transfixed horror as the expression of care and love on your face gave way to surprise, resentment, and finally, complete contempt. When you helped me up from the floor, I thought that everything would be fine and we could... But when you led me to the door, pushed me over the threshold and locked it behind me, I realized that this was the end. I deserved it, but it still took me by surprise. When you threw my clothes and other things onto the lawn, screaming at me from the pain I brought, I knew I couldn't look you in the eyes anymore and I didn't deserve anything from you. So I only took what I could carry and left. Please, if you can, if you find it in yourself to do so, don't hate me. And when the kids ask about me, please, could you let them have good memories of me? That's all I ask of you. I'm working now, but I won't say the name I use because I don't want you to find me if you decide to do so. Someday in the future, maybe when I become stronger, I will allow you to contact me, if, of course, you want it. I'll probably let my sister be my go-between when I'm ready to face you. But until then, a lot needs to happen. I will always love you, Ben, and I only hope that one day you can find it in your big heart to forgive me. I don't know how to end this letter, so I'll just say goodbye. P.S. Know that I love you and our children more than you can imagine. Mary. John finished reading and looked sadly at Ruth. When I read this letter, I looked inside myself and, looking back, I talked to myself. I had to admit the heinousness of what I did in secret and imagine how much it would hurt you if you ever found out. I realized that I had to put an end to this and fix the situation as much as possible under the circumstances. Ruth moved closer and touched John's hand. I probably owe a lot to that poor woman, and I hope she is now at peace and somehow knows that her sad story has helped others learn from her mistakes. John, what will happen to Mary and her family? He just smiled sadly. I personally took the original letter and Mary's things to Ben and told him this story 2 weeks ago. He was devastated. It looks like he was trying to find her to get their family life back on track. The poor guy never got the chance to tell Mary that he had forgiven her and wanted her back in his life. John looked at Ruth sadly, and then turned his head and looked out the window, and there was bitterness in his voice. Now Ben's children will never see their mother again, and their father will bear the burden of grief and guilt for throwing her out of the house, and there is no way to reverse the chain of events. Ruth squeezed John's hand sympathetically. It must have been very difficult for you to tell Ben about his wife. John nodded slowly. I took this task as a kind of atonement, so to speak, my personal repentance. He had to learn everything about Mary, and their story gave me the strength to face my own sins, so I had to be the one to meet and talk to Ben. There was silence in the room for a while, and then John sighed and said, "Unless you want to talk about some other aspect of this mess, I'd rather take a shower, and then we can work out a plan of action for the rest of this day. What do you think?" "Sorry, baby." She hurried. Insert Ruth. "But your day is already planned. Firstly, you will take a shower, but you will not be there alone, and I expect from your crafty hands and not only the hands of great achievements that will provide me with a very pleasant sensations. And I swear you won't leave the shower until I'm completely satisfied. Yours work, or until the hot water runs out. Whichever happens first. She winked at her husband with a slightly predatory grin. Secondly, well, it's dress up to go out into the city, where a sumptuous lunch and shopping trip will await me, with an obligatory visit to the jewelry store, after which on my finger will be that diamond ring that I clearly saw in my future. You remember this, right? And thirdly, Ruth bent her finger, completing the list of her grandiose plans. We'll figure out how we can meet old Gina Laszlo and really rub her nose. I win. She loses. Any questions? There were no questions. John, smiling, raised his hands up, agreeing with his decisive wife on all points. As they headed upstairs to the bedroom and shower, John had to use his wits. He felt that he simply had to ask Ruth this question, visions of which were swirling in his head. Yes, I really have one important question. Do you think... Could we also put on our to-do list a call to Celia Johansson and set up a hot session between you and her? Honey, just imagine how cool it will be. John whistled playfully. Damn it, we could sell tickets and make millions from it. Half the Western world would pay big money to see this scene. And I, of course, will get a ringside seat. Ruth turned sharply on the stairs and deftly brought her clenched fist to his nose, looking down at him from the steps. Her brows furrowed and her eyes flashed with mock indignation, and she growled, Celia and I have hot, loving, and very personal relationships, and I will not allow them desecrated your low-lying need for sexual and financial satisfaction. All clear? Then she leaned even lower, close to his ear, and purred passionately. You can only imagine this picture, lover. John immediately snapped to attention and readily barked, Yes, ma'am, and then said hoarsely, Let's quickly take a shower while this picture is vividly scrolling through my little sick brain. He playfully squealed Ruth on the ass and demanded, Hurry up your ass because I clearly see a very long and pleasant shower session in your near future. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.